start by saying you mentioned that this could be his last speech as the outgoing prime minister. I think it was a great first speech as the incoming opposition. And the reason for that is because he's doing exactly what the opposition is meant to be doing in the very first place, berating the incoming government. It is clear that, as you mentioned earlier, they are adversaries, but they're adversaries from a political angle in the sense that Yair Lapid obviously has very fundamental political and ideological differences than does Netanyahu, but more so than that, he's got very different political and ideological differences than the far right of his new government. And I'm referring specifically here to Jewish Power Party head Itamar Ben-Gvir, as well as the religious Zionism leader Bezalel Smotrich. And so I think that this very much was a speech that was in line with where Yair Lapid is now headed. I don't think it was necessarily a matter of sour grapes. It's the same situation in a sense that the incoming or prime minister designate Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying over and over again that Yair Lapid has not accepted the results. I think it is very clear throughout both the politicians and the public. This was a democratic vote. This is what the people voted. It is not that they don't accept it. It's that, again, a legitimate government may tend to do illegitimate things once in power. And I think that's where he stands in terms of the opposition saying that he's going to fight it.
And on the topic of some of Netanyahu's coalition allies, particularly Itamar Ben-Gvir, there's been a lot of backlash, at least publicly speaking, about a new proposal to change Israel's basic law and who is allowed to serve and who isn't. You have more on that.
Right. So one of the biggest things that has really made headlines in the last couple of hours is Itamar Ben-Gvir no longer necessarily focusing on just the police law, which we've spoken about in terms of one of the preconditions for him to join the government, which would give him more oversight and more control over the police division when he becomes, or if he becomes, national security minister. But another thing that's really been airing across all the headlines right now is what they're calling the racist clause. And basically what they're saying there is that they're going to change the basic law of the Knesset, or the Israeli constitution, that bars any members from serving in the parliament for two reasons, and it's very important to split this. One, that rejects the fact that Israel is a democratic and Jewish country, and the second being one that has an inclination to incite racism. Now, I remember looking at this and getting my knickers in a twist with this because they are two very completely separate things. Now, while this may have been unofficially aimed when it first came out necessarily at the Arab minority that was sitting in the parliament, it was only till about a couple of minutes ago that the Jewish Power Party actually had to come out and make a clarification on it and say, no, we don't mean to change the whole thing, only the part that refers to the incitement to racism, because we don't want to now make it a revolving door and allow the Arab ministers in the government to now say, well, Israel's not Jewish and democratic, but still they would have the right to criticize it from a racism perspective. So this is going to be an interesting law if it does come through, because I think it's going to have more of a shoot yourself in the foot type of aspect. It's really going to be a bit of a revolving door. But again, it just goes to show how much more extreme, if I can put it that way, this is the most far right of an Israeli government that we've had in the history of the state of Israel. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what unfolds with this government. It's also going to be a matter of they were voted in democratically. We have to let them sort of lay their groundwork before starting to criticize it, obviously, as the opposition. And as we've spoken about, Yair Lapid has full ground and a right to be able to start berating them and blisteringly attacking them as it stands.
Well, certainly it seems that shooting themselves in the foot could be a very apt description, because every last one of the powers they are going to assume and any of the changes they're going to make and normalize the making of changes to Israel's basic law could very well find themselves in the hands of Yair Lapid when he is no longer in the opposition at some point in the future. It's not certain that Benjamin Netanyahu's government is going to be the only ones in power for here to perpetuity, after all.
Absolutely, and I think it's going to be very interesting just to see how that comes to play between state and religion. We'll have to just wait and see.